On a sunny summer day, the light in the woods seems magical because it's filtered through all these green leaves and it gives the beautiful green light even to the shadows. And here we have the scene that combines the shadow areas and the sunlit parts of the creek and also the background. And the darker shapes of the trees of the creek are actually silhouetted against that green light so beautifully. So here I'm working with the underpainting. Just recently I had a question about how I choose my colors for the underpainting. So this is a quick answer to that. First of all, I'm working on neutral UART paper and it's really small. It's probably about 5 to maybe 10 inches. Something small I had. And I wanted to do a color study. I don't want to do a formal large painting of this. It seems like a pretty complex scene, and when it is, I'd rather play with it a little bit, maybe on a smaller scale, and make some color decisions and even compositional decisions, of course, on a smaller scale, because then I spare myself from working and reworking different areas. So the underpainting, initially I was using the hard pastels here, and I'm going to use again hard pastels for another 1 or 2 layers on top of this dry underpainting. But right now I'm washing the colors with the isopropyl alcohol. So why did I pick these particular colors? Well, it doesn't really matter as much to me, the colors themselves, the exact colors. But what I really wanted is to create the cooler, warmer pattern that would correspond to the pattern of the light and shadow in the picture. And that's what the most important. And here really, because of green light, the whole scene gets a little bit of that warmth, even in the shadow areas. So that's why I used a lot of browns, some ochres. I didn't really go with the more saturated colors here. I wanted to tone it down a little bit. But overall, once I washed the colors, I can clearly see the areas of the scene that are receiving more light and those that are more in the shadow. And that is the cooler, warmer contrast. And that will help me to create that beautiful light in a painting. Overall, I would say the colors in this particular underpainting are pretty close to local colors, meaning the colors that eventually are going to be there, the colors we are seeing in the picture basically. So we definitely have some of those darker kind of browns and purples maybe in the shadows. So that's what I'm taking care of right now, and that is a very dark pastel I'm using right now, and it's a cooler color for the more recessed areas here, and I'm working very lightly, but you can see how this soft pastel definitely adds that really nice saturated dark color that really creates that sharper contrast here. And I like that because yes, I created the pattern of light and dark here in the picture, but now taking care of this darker contrast, creating those darker contrasting areas, I'm pushing those more recessed areas back. I'm creating more of a contrast between the light and the shadows. So that definitely helps to create more three-dimensional situation here. And also it's going to help the lighter areas shine more. So the darker colors are usually set in first, at least the way I'm working. And with pastels, it's actually a good idea because it is easier than gradually to add those lighter colors on top and not the other way around. Because the other way around, if you start with the lighter ones and if you want to darken them, you might end up with chalky color. So the darker colors, I'm not only using those for kind of the obvious darker areas, but also kind of for the areas, let's say in the water, where we have the foam and it seems like that part should be lighter, but I'm setting up the darker color there, maybe even like darker browns, darker greens. So what's up with that? That is because the water is going to show what's underneath. And if underneath is a darker rock, white rock, darker rock, if it's in the shadow, and it's going to be kind of lighter browns, even like more orange sometimes, if it is a sunlit area. Like on the left, this whole area is brightly sunlit pretty much, and we do have a lot of that white foam kind of in the water, or the highlights on the water sparkling, but underneath we should still see some of the kind of greenish color, lighter brown color. So that's why I'm taking care of it right now, because later when I start adding those lighter colors, it will be difficult to kind of squeeze those darker browns if needed to add some depth to that water. It will be very difficult to add that in between those lights. So that's why that order in which I'm working. And you also see that I already set up those greens for the trees, greens for the bushes or trees that we see here growing in the area on the left, but also the darker trees on the right. I definitely wanted to create this asymmetrical composition here, so the left part of the picture at the top is going to have that more sunlit area where we are going to see those lighter greener colors, and on the right we have darker, kind of thicker trees there. And that just helps me to create a better composition, better layout, because I don't want symmetry. I already have this big rock in the middle and the tree, the thicker tree kind of almost in the middle. So now I want to create a little bit more variation there so that it's not looking so obvious. Of course, I could have moved the tree a little bit, but I think it still works. I also think that having that main tree lean towards the left a little bit, it definitely breaks that symmetry, and it also supports a certain movement in the picture. Like we have those diagonals for the water, for the streaming water, and it kind of supports that direction as well. But of course, I balance it out in the distance with those smaller tree trunks. So there's a lot of that going on in this small scene, but it is a very complex in a way as far as the composition, and it probably should be improved upon, maybe with a separate value sketch, maybe not being distracted by color. But here I'm just making the color choices. And now that exciting part of adding that green light in the distance. Of course, I already had some kind of golden looking light there, so it definitely had that illusion of light. But now I can actually create that color there that I was so kind of excited about. And first, kind of mid-tone green, and then the lighter greens, and just a mix of green colors, because I don't want that color in the distance to be flat. I wanted to create kind of the illusion of a lot of things happening in the distance, but at the same time not being distracting. And if you noticed, I kind of cross-hatched over the tree trunks in the distance with that green color, green hard pastel, and it made those tree trunks softer. It's as if they are kind of bathed in that green light in the distance. And what it creates it helps the distance to be basically like a backdrop for this scene that we have in front, in the middle ground, with these main trees, with the rocks, with the water. So when we don't have those sharp edges in the distance, when we don't have the sharp color contrast in the distance, it's going to recede better, it's going to look softer. So that's why I did it that way. And now I'm bringing a little bit more detail into the tree trunks that are closer to us, so that will help them stand out, come forward even more. And that contrast is value contrast, meaning lighter and darker contrast, and also some detail, some finer details are going to be found again in the middle ground and also in the foreground. And if somehow while I was working all throughout the painting I start losing those darker colors, or they end up being kind of covered up or not even strong enough initially, now it's the time again to kind of find them, push them back, those darker colors, super dark colors, and then I can start creating the colors on top of that. Like for example, those darker purples, they were the shadows, let's say, for the rock, for the tree, for those bushes next to the tree. That is the shadow. Then a little bit lighter green is laid on top of that. And I'm still refining the distance, but you can see that it's just all working together, all those greens. So I have a little bit kind of suggestion of the grasses, suggestion of the tree trunks, and I make sure that there's a certain design to that, to the tree trunks, so they are not just kind of like a fence, one after another, spaced equally. I want to make it exciting. I want to make it kind of a little bit mysterious what's going on there. And also here at the rock, that more flat surface of the rock on the left, that was emphasized with the horizontal marks. And then I'm going to start adding water. Those will be the vertical marks. So here again, just adding some of those darker colors on the stream bed, I guess it's called, right? The area that we're going to see through the water. And maybe some of the lighter color, maybe for the water in the distance, that we see the sunlit part of that stream. So here, now I start adding some of the lighter colors here into the stream of that water on the left. And you can also notice that I'm still using the colors that are not the lightest colors. And even for the rock here, a little bit of this color, kind of not the lightest colors. And the rock is in the shadow pretty much, but there's some dappled lights there. But I still want to create enough of those kind of mid-tones, darker mid-tone colors, so that I can build some of those highlights on top and create the contrast if it's needed. And I also make sure there's a little bit, kind of a hint of green in those grays that I'm using, because that's what I mentioned initially, that light is filtering through the leaves, and there's definitely that hint of green in the shadows, and it creates that beautiful light, beautiful magical light. Starting to add a little bit of detail here and there, but it's still not the final kind of touches. But I am now refining the colors, so that if I look at this overall picture, I have a certain feeling. Like what the light is. Kind of beautiful colors come together to create a certain mood. And here's that water when it's dropping from that rock that's elevated. Now I have that darker color, and the blue that I'm going to use for the shadow areas for the water, that's going to be that blue, and that is going to create those vertical marks for the water falling from that rock. And that direction kind of describes the movement of the water. So that water again has to show a little bit of the darker area, because it's not just one continuous thick wall of water, but we definitely see some of the rock color through it. So that's why I'm still keeping those darker browns, darker grays showing through. And then in the parts where it actually catches more sunlight, a little bit of that stronger dappled light there, or the parts of those kind of separated mini streams there within it, that is catching a little bit more light as well. But again, not the white. Don't just take the white color and do that. The white is going to be the highlight. Like right now, this brighter color, again, it's not a straight white. If you actually saw that next to more pure white, you would see it's still not really pure white. But it is warmer color. It's definitely showing that is brightly sunlit. And I can start adding some of that here in the stream on the left part of the stream, and start creating kind of the movement within the water, because the marks, those elongated marks, are going to show that the movement of the water here. And with the lighter, a little bit lighter blue, I'm showing those more aerated parts within the water in the shadow. And also that light water that I put previously in the top right corner, it has some shadows from the trees, those distant trees casting those shadows. So a little bit of blue there, it interrupts that flow of that kind of very light yellow green. So that makes it more interesting, more realistic, more interesting to explore. So don't just leave those big diagonals running all the way through your painting. It's more interesting when they're interrupted a little bit. And right now, starting to get a little bit more color here in the shadow side. I was mostly preoccupied with the left side of the picture, but still I was working all around like I usually do, and like I always suggest to my students, so that we don't end up with a situation when we completely need to change the whole areas of the picture because it's just wrong value maybe. And working on the water, this is kind of very challenging situation here. Of course, I'm more concerned with color here, how the color works together. But if you would like to have more in-depth lesson on this, I do have a self-study lesson on very similar subject on the stream, and it shows how to create that beautiful water in the stream that you can actually look through and looks very realistic, and it shows the reflections of the sky in the water, that you definitely get the feeling of the surface of the water. and you can see through and see the bottom of the creek. That's in my self-study lesson, and you can check it out. There's a link in the description below for that lesson. And if you're enjoying this video, please give it a like. I really appreciate it. And now the exciting part, starting to add. And now the exciting part, those sparkles on the water, those shimmering surfaces on the water. And it's important not to overdo that, because if there's too much of that, even though it might seem that the reference has the water maybe like all white in certain area, it's just going to flatten it. If there's too much of the same color, it's just going to flatten it. We need to show some depth, and for that we still need some of that color of the rocks maybe underneath showing through. Eventually, if it becomes too much of that light color, I might brush off some of this and maybe restore some of those mid-tones that ran away from me, that became too light, because like I keep saying, we need a range of colors to show some depth. And here it's just so tempting to go around with this light and create those shimmering areas on the water. And just want again to say how important it is at this point to start emphasizing the direction of the water with our marks, and that's what I'm trying to do. Here I have a little bit of a edge that I want to show, kind of give these rocks a little bit more definition. So in these shadow areas, they were kind of soft edged, but now I can actually start creating sharper edges in those rocks so that it creates a little bit more defined shape. And also it's more defined water area there as well, so it kind of gives more direction to the water. And now this lovely gray. I love this gray for this particular painting. It's just so nice. It has that green built in, but it's so subtle. And also for the dappled light effect, maybe some warmer color on the rocks in the shadows, and some of those browns too. Now it's also time to create that trickling water, or pouring, rushing water really, from that rock on the right. And I'm doing that with blue color, not taking that very light color, but creating those streams, that water pouring off the rock with this blue. And that same blue I was using in the shadow area on the left in that water as well. And for the shadows, they are up in the stream, so it's consistent, and you kind of want to have consistency in the colors as well. If I'm using certain colors in the shadow for the same material, basically same substance, I should repeat it. I shouldn't just jump to completely different colors in different areas. So that's one of the things that makes the painting more readable to the viewer, because of course it's not a photograph, it's not meant to be, but there should be certain things that are easier for the viewer to understand. And even if the style is very impressionistic, so that's one of those. And now I have even warmer light color, and that is basically the ultimate highlight. And because we have the dappled light area in the shadow as well, I can use some of that even in those kind of shadow areas in the water. And I had that on the right side of the painting, more shadow side. And I also had it in the other areas with more sunlight. These rocks that are in the foreground, they're kind of having smoother edges in a way at the top. Maybe they were made smoother by all that water, kind of polished them. Or maybe it's some growth on them that makes them kind of sleeker. So that's why I'm adding the highlights, but I'm also making them a little bit fuzzier, a little bit softer around. So it's not as sparkling as on the water, just kind of a little bit smoother areas around them. So even trying out different colors, again, this is the color study, so it is the time to study those colors, to try them out, to see how they work. Like if I want that part to be a little warmer, do I use some orange, do I use some yellow, you know, that type of stuff, or maybe it's pink. There's no reason that I should repeat exactly those colors that I see in a photograph, and even those are not exactly correct. And if we look at the screen at the same picture showing on different screens, we also will see the variation in those colors. So don't feel like you are bound to that. So here's the moment I was talking about. If something becomes too light, too white, I want to bring a little bit more color back into it. So I added those ochres, those lighter ochres and a little bit darker ochres, and that now shows me a little bit more the shadow in that stream. Part of the stream that's next to that larger rock in front of it makes the contrast between the light and the shadows a little bit more clearly defined, and it's just easier to read, and it also makes the lights stand out more. And here just again some of these brighter marks. That's a very tempting area to create a lot of these little shiny marks, so that to show that the water is not smooth, that it's very rough, that it's picking up the light on its surface differently in all these different areas. It's easy to end up with too much white again. And now it's the time to start adding those really final touches. So here I just lit up those plants that are right in front of that major tree, and see how just a touch of that brighter green, lighter green, that shows that sunlight that sparkles on it, and it kind of continues that same idea that there's the light and that bush next to the tree catching some of that light, but then the stronger light is on the water. And also to make that area a little bit more interesting, I'm giving it some more detail, those roots hanging along the rock. And even in the distance, just a little bit of texture, and that will show the plants in the distance. And also maybe to emphasize that light that we see on the water on the left, on that flat surface of the rock. And that is finished. That's a color study, and that's pretty much what I wanted to achieve here. So if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. The YouTube will know that they should show this video to more people. And also I hope I inspired you to make more color studies. Check out my other videos here on YouTube, and I will see you in the next video.